Okay, today we will start chapter 14, lesson 1. First of all, notice there are only 3 lessons in this chapter. And also notice the years. So we're starting at 8600-ish to about 1629. Okay, so we will come back to the map, but if you look really quickly, you can see we are moving more to the east now, right? We were focusing on the Roman Empire, Italy, Constantinople, that area, right? And now we're going to move more and talk more about Arabia. Also, it will actually kind of circle back to when we used to be talking back about, Egypt and then Jerusalem and all the other religious centers we talked about before, right? So it kind of comes full circle. Okay, so we're going to start with 14.1, which talks, of course, they always do some geographic talk first, right? So one of the things we need to make sure you're getting clear is the idea that Islam is the name of the religion, okay? An Arab is a person who, at least originally, lived in Arabia, okay? So it is not the same thing, so you got to be careful, right? A Muslim is the person who follows the religion of Islam, and that could be anywhere, okay? All right. They mention here a lot of specifics. We'll talk about more of that when we do the maps, but I do want to just point out that it is a desert type area, right? The Arabian Peninsula is where we're going to talk about, which is also called just Arabia for short. You'll notice it is just to the east of the areas we kind of talked about before. And even if you go way back to the beginning, right, we were focusing on this area, the Fertile Crescent, a long time ago, right? Okay, so the regions should sound familiar. But like we've talked about before, they were somewhat isolated because it was more of a desert kind of, got separated somewhat by its deserts and its climate, okay? And because it's on a peninsula, right, it's separated by water on 3 sides, so somewhat separated. So if we go way, way back, we can talk about how there are nomads, like everyone was in the beginning, right? These nomads in this era are usually called Bedouin. So Bedouin are nomads that traveled mostly with camels. Of course, with the desert climate, that would be the right choice, right? And other animals that can survive that kind of climate, goats, sheep, so on. And they, I'm sure you know, right, they travel from oasis to oasis, and they survive that way, and they do fine, okay? Even though it's pretty harsh. So originally, like we've talked about many times before, the nomads each had little tribes, and they would fight amongst themselves, and the leader of the tribe in Arabia was called a sheikh. They would compete against other tribes for resources, and that was pretty common, okay? Then if we switch over then, just like everywhere else, they settle down into towns and get larger villages and things. And trade becomes a thing, right? And so, again, they're going to trade across deserts, so it's usually by camel, so that's called a caravan. They would go together in groups for safety, so they wouldn't, be as open to raids and getting, things stolen and hurt. So for safety, they'd go together in a long line called a caravan, and Mecca becomes a major city because it's on that crossroads of trade. And if you look back at the map, you can see it's going to be really, it's on the coast there from the Red Sea. And so it's going to be a good location for trade. And then also, of course, because of that, also becomes a major religious site. And the Kaaba is one of the most famous places in Mecca. It is a cube-like box that apparently dates back to even before Islam started, and it was used back when they had many deities, right? And they'd have all the statues that they'd worship. Remember, just like in the other places we've talked about, Allah was one of the deities, but they thought he was like the most important one, the creator. And there is, even today, in the Kaaba, it's still a very important religious site, and people go and travel there. And there is a stone, a black stone, lodged in the outside corner of the Kaaba, that people go to and try to touch and even kiss, because it was said to have been their founder Muhammad is apparently the one who put it there. And it's a religious stone. They think it's basically possibly a meteorite. It's hard to know, because they said it came down from the heavens, and it's a religious stone, like pointing the way. They thought it came from like the time of Adam and Eve. And so it's a very important stone. And so people, when they go there, try to, like I said, touch it or kiss it. In these times of coronavirus, imagine, they've had to shut that down too, right? Because imagine how many people, it's extremely crowded, and people are all pushing and shoving and trying to get close enough to touch it. And like, can you imagine everyone touching it and kissing it? Particularly bad at this time, right? Anyway, so the Kaaba is a very extremely famous site, mosque, and I will show you that. So anyway, how does this work? So the founder, like I said, of the religion is a man named Muhammad. Muhammad was born into a okay merchant family, but he was unfortunately orphaned at a very young age, and he had to kind of work himself up. He was a trader, caravan leader, and he does okay. He does pretty well, but he was very saddened by all the things he saw, all the greed and dishonesty, and how people weren't valuing the important things. And so he used to kind of separate himself off and go out and pray in a cave by himself. He particularly hated some of the things that were done at that time, with all the celebrations to all the different deities and things that were done. So anyway, he would go off to it by himself, and according to their religion, he saw a vision, and in the vision, a voice called to him and told him he was supposed to recite the words of God and Allah. And Allah is the word for God, and so you will never hear them say God, right? They'll say Allah. And anyway, in this voice, the voice told him to recite, and he could not read. And so anyway, I will show you a video about that. But he does become a preacher. And he says that, God told him that you're supposed to worship only the one true God, Allah, and you are not supposed to have all those statues and all the different gods. There's only one God, okay? So that is a big departure, right, from that at his time, having, he doesn't want it to be polytheistic. He thinks it's only monotheistic. And he said he should focus on the important things, right? Do good things for people, give to the poor and help people, things like that. Okay, so he and his family and friends become the first Muslim. So Muslim, like I said earlier, is a person who believes in the religion of Islam. Okay, and so, of course, as you can imagine, the poor people are going to like his message of helping the poor, and, the people in control, right? The wealthy merchants and leaders are not going to so much like him, and especially if he's criticizing the way they're doing things. Okay, so he and his followers are feeling like Mecca becomes very dangerous for him, and so they decide to leave and go to another town where they feel they'll be safer. So Yathrib is the city they go to, and it is later changed the name to Medina, and so today the city of Medina is also very famous because it's literally means the city of the prophet, right? The prophet Muhammad. And so the Hijra is what they call him leaving and going and breaking off with Mecca, the major city, and going and starting his own city. And so that idea of him breaking off is the Hijra is a very famous thing. It becomes that year that he did that, 622 is becoming the year one of the Muslim calendar. And of course, the people there are all the people that believe in Muhammad and his new religion, right? So he became very, very popular. And of course, he is not just a good religious leader, but he was also a good political leader, someone who could lead the people. And so he sets up a government, and this is the idea of, it's called the Islamic State. The government is going to be run with these Islamic ideas, right? And everyone there who had to believe in the Islamic religion, and they thought it was more important to do that than anything, even loyalty to your own tribe, which before that time, remember with the nomads and everything, your tribe was everything, and that's who was your leader. So for people to be shifting towards this new idea is pretty big. Okay, so he gets a strong army, and they start, like normal for the time, they're going around and conquering different places. And they eventually reconquer Mecca and take that. And so he is building like a little empire for himself called the Islamic State, which was basically almost the whole Arabian Peninsula at this point. Around 632 is when he dies. Okay. And so this religion, it is important to talk about. It is very similar to Jews and Christians' beliefs, and that a lot of people don't realize, okay? So the one God is the same God that Jews and Christians believe in. They just call him Allah. But they're monotheistic, all of them, right? There's one God. There's a lot of moral guidance, right? How you should act. They do believe in all the same people, right? You know how we said like Jews were like the original, and then Christians were Jews. Then they kind of broke off once they believed that Jesus was a new prophet, right? And then they had some slightly different changes. Well, think of Islam as like part 3. So Islam also believes in all those same people like Adam and Eve and Abraham and Moses and all the people we've talked about. They also believe that Jesus was a prophet, but now they have this next prophet, Muhammad. So they believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. Okay, so that's why it drives me crazy when I hear people, thinking so badly about Muslims or misrepresenting what they believe and thinking that they're all these, people who believe in violence and all things. That is all not true. If anything, right, Jews and Christians should feel like closer to them because they believe so many of the same things. So it's crazy to me that there's such bad feelings and misunderstanding. Okay, Muhammad, one of his things was that he got his ideas, right, his messages from Allah, because he was a prophet, right? He takes his ideas from his God. And so after his death, they wrote down all the things he said he got from God, right? These messages, and that becomes the Quran. And that's the holy book of Islam. So You will see it spelled different ways. You see it here with the Q in your book. Often, sometimes you see it with a K, K-O-R-N too. So don't be surprised if you see it spelled a few different ways. Sometimes there's also an apostrophe after the U. So in the Quran, it's very similar, right? How you should live, a lot of about being honest and not killing and lying and stealing and respecting your parents and all the same things that we've talked about with Jews and Christians, right? And the other thing is there's very, God is like the supreme being and telling you how to act. And there's a lot about how you're supposed to act. And so there's 5 main ideas called the 5 pillars of Islam. And your book does a terrible job right here, just quickly mentioning them. So I'm going to go into them a little bit more in detail in a minute and on a separate page. Real quickly, before I switch that, I do want to say that those are the 5 major things that all Muslims do. There are some other things over the years that have also developed. There's something called Sharia, and that is basically like how you're supposed to act, like a code of laws. Like, for instance, you're not supposed to gamble, you can't drink alcohol, there's certain things you can't eat, like pork. So those were things that have developed over the time. And also, there's also something called Sunnah, which is also different ideas of how you're supposed to act and what you're supposed to do based on like modeling yourself after Muhammad. Okay. All right, so here are my notes on the 5 pillars of Islam. Think of a pillar. Remember, a pillar is something that holds up the weight of the ceiling, right? And so that's like the 5 most important parts of ideas of Islam that really everyone follows, okay? So the first one is the profession of faith, meaning that they recite and say, there is none worthy of worship except God, which of course they don't say God, they say Allah. And Muhammad is the messenger of God, or the one true prophet. So they're saying here, right, they're monotheistic. There is no other God, and you can only worship that one God, right? We know how that important that is to monotheistic religions. And then, of course, that they believe that Muhammad was the last messenger of God, okay? The second thing is that they pray 5 times a day. So it's spread throughout the day, roughly at dawn, midday, late afternoon, sunset, and at night, and nightfall. Okay, and they encourage you to go to a mosque, but it's not required. So a mosque is kind of like their church, right? They don't have priests like church, but it is somewhere to go and pray together. Okay. But most people do it at home or at work. They just stop what they're doing and they go, and they usually have their own personal prayer rug. It's very important to be clean, and they even like wash up, even like they're all the way to their elbows, I believe, and like even their feet, right? They wash to be clean before they pray, and so they have their own prayer rug, so they have a clean place to pray, because they do go and put their hands and forehead down on the rug. That's called prostrating. Okay, so if they're at the mosque, there's already rugs all over the place, so you don't have to bring your own. But most people have their own rolled up at work or wherever, so they can have it available. Okay, and so they go and they face the direction of Mecca. If you were in Mecca, you'd be facing specifically the Kaaba, that black cube that we talked about. And so you pray 5 times a day. Okay. Also, there is, if you are in a Muslim country, or even if you're not, if you sometimes might hear someone kind of singing or chanting, that person's called a muezzin, and they are saying the call to prayer, telling people to come and remind them to pray. So if you're near a mosque, you might hear that. If you're in a particularly Muslim country, you might even hear it on the radio station or, television or something too. Okay. All right. Third thing is charity. Okay. You are required to give to charity at least 2.5% of your wealth every year. And if you can give more, of course, they would encourage that. And if you don't have much money, you can even still try to give charity, as in like your time, right? So like teenagers and things would go and donate their time. Also, fasting is very important during the holy month of Ramadan. And that you are purifying your body, you're kind of sacrificing so you understand, right, how important it is to like dedicate yourself and how lucky you are to have food and things like that, right? So you don't eat or drink all day from sun up to sundown. Okay, so usually what they do is for the month, they get up and they eat a really big breakfast in the dark, right, before the sun gets up. And then they have to make it all day without anything to eat or drink all the way until at night, right? And once the sun goes down, then they can have a big feast then. So it's not that they're starving, they will eat, right? It's just they have to wait a long time, and especially the drinking, I think, would be very difficult. And again, it's to show your devotion and like kind of, feel what it would be like, right, to give up for your religion. There are exceptions. You don't have to fast if you're sick or older or pregnant. If there's certain things that you should, of course, not hurt your health. And if you are just like sick right now temporarily and you can't do it or whatever, then your idea is you'll make it up later, right, to still do it. Okay, and then everyone is supposed to try to have a pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca at least once in your lifetime, if you are healthy enough and if you can afford it. And people will save up and go to Mecca. So, of course, it depends where you live, how much of a big travel journey that is. And they go to the Mecca, and there's a few different sites that they go and visit. And one being the Kaaba, which is that black cube, and they'll go and you circle around it. And there's a whole procedure, and you wear certain white clothing and things like that. And so, again, you're supposed to be like dedicating yourself to your religion and try to do that at least once.